Hi, this is the Group 2, and we are going to talk about the responses of the Filipinos against the Spanish colonialism.
Hi, my name is Jessica Italiano from Group 2 and I'll be discussing the conspiracy against the Spaniards and Chinese insurrections. Conspiracy against the Spaniards, popularly known as the Conspiracy of the Maharlikas, or in Spanish, La Conspiración de las Maharlikas, also known as the Revolt of the Lacans. Tondo Conspiracy or Lacan Revolt were led by Don Agustin de Legazpi of Tondo and his cousin Martin Pangan. This was on year 1587 to 1588. It is a revolt planned by Tagalog nobles known as Maharlikas to overthrow the Spanish government in the Philippines due to injustices against the Filipinos. It was territorially one of the largest conspiracies against the Spanish rule next to the Katipunan. It ranged from provinces near Manila all the way to Calamianes Islands near Palawan. The leader of the revolt, Don Agustin de Legazpi, sought help from a Japanese sea captain named Juan Gaya and other places. He asked for arms and warriors to fight alongside with them in exchange for one half of the tributes called in the Philippines. The places that he requested help is from Borneo, Laguna, and Batangas with a plan to assault, which means to physically attack the city of Manila and assassinate the Spaniard. But the plan didn't succeed. Why? Because their plan was discovered by the Spaniards when Magat Salamat revealed their plan to fellow rebel, to Antonio Surabao, who turned out to be a traitor when he reported the conspiracy to the Spaniards. Magat Salamat didn't know that he revealed their plan to fellow rebel, which is a traitor, and Antonio Surabao reported the plan to the Spaniards. All the conspirators, leaders of the revolt, were punished, with some being put to death and others being exiled. Agustin de Legazpi and Martin Pangan, the leader of the revolt, were brutally hanged as punishment. The plot against the Spaniards died alongside with them, and conspirators failed to execute their plan the way they wanted. Their plan was failed to overthrow the Spanish government due to injustices against the Filipinos. Chinese insurrections or Sangli Revolt. The revolt was led by Juan Bautista de Vera on the year 1603, a wealthy Catholic Chinese who was highly esteemed by the Spaniards and feared and respected by the Sangli. On the same year, during springtime, three official Mandarin representatives arrived in a large fleet of ships. They said they were searching for a mountain of gold. On the same year, Chinese during this time were almost 10 times the number of Spaniards. Therefore, we can conclude that Chinese people during this time were greater than the Spaniards. The Spanish concluded a forthcoming invasion of Manila from China. During preparations, the leader of the revolt, Juan Bautista de Vera, had continued to mingle with the Spanish and posed as their confidant. He carried out a census to ascertain the number of men of his race. De Vera found that there were enough Chinese men to carry out the revolt and gave orders to construct a fort and quarters at a hidden location in Tondo, where rice, provisions, and weapons were stored. The Sangli began to gather in Tondo. The plan was discovered by the Spanish. The Sanglis found out, and instead of attacking on November 30, St. Andrew's Day, they gathered on October 3, the eve of St. Francis. On the eve of St. Francis, 2,000 men were at their constructed fort. As the leader of the revolt, Juan Bautista de Vera, reported this to the governor, saying that the Sanglis were at the other side of the river. Suspiciously, the governor immediately arrested de Vera and executed him as punishment of treason. Almost 20,000 Sanglis, both accused and were part of the rebellion, were massacred after days of fighting without the presence of de Vera. The revolt did not succeed. Governor General Luis Perez Dasmariñas, the insurrection was put down by joint Spanish, native and Japanese forces led by the interim Governor General.
Good day, everyone. I am Ayla Marie B. Costa, and today I will report the insurrections by Filipinos in Bohol and Leyte, the Tumblot uprisings, Bangkao Revolt, Sumori Revolt, and the Malongs Revolt.
Tamblot uprising in 1622. Tamblot was a Babylon or native priest from the Bohol, Philippines who led the Tamblot uprisings in 1621 to 1622. During the Spanish era, he opposed the new religion spread by the Spaniards and fought against the subsequent conversion of the Boholanos to the Catholic faith. According to the legend, he challenged the Spanish priest, and when he won, he exhorted them free themselves from Spanish oppression, leading 2,000 followers in what was dubbed as the Tamblot Uprising or Tamblot Revolt.
The revolt initiated by Tamblot was successful that it spread through the provinces of Leyte.
Bancao Revolt. Bancao was a native but was baptized by the order of Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. It is a spiritual uprising against the Spanish colony led by Bancao. It lasted for 2 years, 1621 to 1622. The leader of this revolt was Bancao. Miguel Lopez de Legazpi arrived in the Philippines in the year 1565 in the town of Carigara, which is known as Southern Leyte. As he arrived, he was warmly welcomed by Dato of Carigara, Dato Bancao. Miguel Lopez de Legazpi requested to send Fathers Pedro Quirino, Juan Ocampo, and Cosme de Flores and Gaspar Garay to Leyte. Dato Bancao was one of the first converts, and most of Carigara was also baptized soon after. The priest characterized them as loyal Christians. After 50 years had passed Dato Bancao's baptism, his thoughts started to change and he started to want to change back his previous religion. With the persuasion of Babaylan, Tamblot, he finally made his mind. Together with a Babaylan named Pagali and his children, he built a temple for Adiwata and he incited people from 6 towns to participate in the revolt. It is believed that Pagali used some magic to attract followers and thought that they could turn the Spaniards into clay by hurling bits of earth of them. Father Melchor de Vera, a Jesuit, went to Cebu and warned the Spanish authorities of the revolt. Alcalde Mayor Alacarazo thought a way to prevent the revolt. The Spaniards offered peace at first, but they rejected the offer. Bancao and Pagali died in the battle, while his second son was beheaded as a traitor and his daughter was taken as captive. Bancao's head was placed on a stake as public warning to generate fear among natives. The Sumoroy Revolt 1649 to 1650. In the town of Palapag, today in northern Samar, Agustin Sumoroy Awaray and some of his followers rose in arms on June 1, 1649 over the Polo Y servicios system being undertaken in Samar. This is known as the Sumoroy Revolt. Named after Agustin Sumoroy, the government in Manila directed that all natives subject to Polo are not to be sent to places distant from their hometowns to do their polo. However, under orders of the various towns, alcaldes or mayors Samarnons were being sent to the shipyards of Cavite to do their polo, which sparked the revolt. The local parish priest of Palapag was murdered and the revolt eventually spread to Mindanao, Bicol, and the rest of Visayas, especially in places such as Cebu, Masbate, Camiguin, Zamboanga, Albay, Camarines, and parts of northern Mindanao, such as Surigao. A free government was also established in the mountain of Samar. The defeat, capture, and execution of Sumoroy in June 1650 delivered a big setback to the revolt. His trusted co-conspirator David Dula sustained the quest of freedom with greater vigor, but in one of the fierce battles several years later, he was wounded, captured, and later executed in Patapa, northern Samar, by the Spaniards together with his 7 key lieutenants.
Lastly, the Malong's Revolt. Andres Malong was the Maestro de Campo of Binalatungan, now San Carlos City in Pangasinan, 1660s.
Andres Malong led some natives in Pangasinan to take up arms against the Spanish government and proclaim himself King of Pangasinan. However, his kingdom was short-lived and soon most of his forces abandoned him, enabling the Spanish forces to capture him and subsequently executed him. Later, Juan de la Cruz Palaris, a native of Binalatungan, led a renewal of the revolt. The natives required the alcalde, mayor of Pangasinan, to resign. The people of Pangasinan continued their resistance nonetheless, but they finally defeat in March 17 1564. There are causes of the revolt: maltreatment of the people by Spanish officials of the province regarding forced labor, working away from their families without being paid. Unlike other revolts, Malong targeted only the Spanish government officials, not the Spanish priests. On February 6, 1661, Malong was captured. He was brought to Lingayen for trial and executed there by firing squad. He led the people in Pangasinan to take up arms against the Spaniards. It spread like wildfire in Pangasinan. Because of his success, he proclaimed himself King of Pangasinan.
I'm David Jana Espina, and I'm going to report about Dagohoy's revolt. Dagohoy's revolt is the longest revolt in history, which lasted for 85 years. It started in 1744 to 1829. This movement aimed to make Bohol once more a land of free men, can be considered as one of the earliest victories of Filipinos over the Spaniards, as the island fell into the hands of the natives. Bohol was the place where the vessel Concepcion was abandoned and burned after Magellan's death in Mactan in 1521. How it all started: in 1744, Father Morales supervised the district of Inabangan. He sent out Dagohoy's brother Sagarino to arrest a renegade Indio, but was killed during the resist. Father Morales did not consider giving Sagarino a proper burial. This started Dagohoy's motivation to correct the Spaniards' wrongdoing to the natives. Father Morales refused permission for a Catholic burial, and Dagohoy's cadaver lay rotting for 3 days. Francisco, infuriated at the unsympathetic and treatment by the parish priest in the mountains between Inabangan and Talibon, Dagohoy established his headquarters and proclaimed the independence of Bohol. In January 24, 1746, one of Dagohoy's bold warriors killed Father Giuseppe Lamberti, an Italian Jesuit, and Father Morales. In 1747, Bishop Juan de Arcadera dispatched a Spanish expedition to Bohol under the command of Don Pedro Lechuga. Dagohoy resisted and forced it to withdraw to Zamboanga. Evidently, Dagohoy and his followers were not against the Catholic region, but resolutely refused to come again under the political domination of Spain. Father Pedro de Santa Barbara tried to convince Dagohoy he was welcome and well treated, but Dagohoy still refused to give up. 1744 to August 31 to 1829. For 85 years, the Boholanos successfully maintained their independence and continued to fight for it. Dagohoy probably died before the year 1829 in their headquarters, either because of old age or sickness. His followers, imbued by his indomitable courage and fearless heroism. Then the revolt continued. By 1770, just before the American War for Independence against Great Britain, there were about 30,000 Boholanos who were still part of the revolution. Gaspar de la Torre, 1739 to 1745. Mariano Ricafort, 1825 to 1830. Both generals and the other 20 failed to suppress the libertarian struggle. 3 generations of Boholanos had passed. Few of the rebels presented themselves. Under proclamation, the raids of the loyalists continued. Fray Pedro de Santa Barbara, a Recollect friar, troops were withdrawn in 1770 from most of the island stations, and a general amnesty was proclaimed. Several attempts of taking the Boholanos down, but the Spaniards failed. This continued until May 1827. In April 1828, after the arrival of Governor General Mariano Ricafort, the Spanish sent its strongest expedition to Bohol. After the Spaniards' defeat and loss of colonies, they decided to use their Spanish and native or Cebuanos troops. Ricafort dispatched another military to pulverize the mountain forts of the rebels in Inabangan and Talibon. This time, Ricaport's troops were successful, thus determined the longest revolt in Philippine history, and next to the Revolution of 1896, the most successful in eroding Spanish sovereignty over the archipelago. Missing Dagohoy's excellent leadership, the Boholanos made their last stand in the mountain of Boasa, and in August 31, 1829, the revolt formally ended. Dagohoy was able to maintain a government. His rule was firm and just. He was obeyed and respected by his people. In conclusion, during the Bohol's independence, the patriotic Boholanos lived as free and sovereign people. They did not render forced labor nor pay tribute. They suffered neither racial discrimination nor social humiliation from the hands of the Spaniards.
This is Christina Maureen O. Buhian, and I will talk about the birth of the Filipino nationalism. Under this are Silang Revolt and Cavite Mutiny.
The Silang Revolt have different causes: Jago's imprisonment, abusive government, and heavy taxation. Jago approached their alcalde mayor Don Antonio Zabala and requested to hear the people's demands. But Don Antonio Zambala suspected that he would initiate a revolt, thus Jago was ordered to be arrested. Silang's companions and friends did everything for his release. Eventually, on December 14, 1762, he started a revolt and made Vigan the capital of the defiance. Bishop Bernardo Ustariz of Vigan encouraged the Ilocanos to withdraw or give up. Silang imprisoned the people who followed the order of the bishop. Finally, in order for the people to give up, Spanish Governor Simon de Anda sent Silang an ultimatum. Silang then decided to seek the protection of the British. He accepted the British offer of friendship to fight against the Spaniards. Miguel Vicos, the one who conspired to kill Silang for revenge, offered money to Silang's trusted aide Pedro Becbec. Becbec had told them the location of Silang, and Vicos killed Silang by shooting him. Silang's leadership ended because of Vicos' bullet, not because of the Spaniards. Despite his death, Gabriela Silang, Jago's wife, continued the fight for him. She was accompanied by Nicolas Carino, Jago's uncle, and took command of forces. They succeeded their battle in Santa Ilocos Sur. Unfortunately, in Cabugao, Carino died during the battle along with other companions. Gabriela and her warriors fled to Abra and recruited some natives. With her newly reorganized army, they marched towards Vigan. But, with the aid of the Apayos and Kalingas, the Spaniards captured her and her surviving troops. After months of fighting, on the day of September 23, 1763, Gabriela and her companions were executed in Vigan, Ilocos Sur. Next, we are going to talk about the three martyr priests in Cavite Mutiny. On 1872, there are three priests, namely Fathers Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. This started on December 1870 with the alteration of the system of government in Spain. The political atmosphere in the Philippines changed. The governor at that time, Governor Rafael de Izquierdo, discarded the liberal measures, and the workers' privilege or exemption of giving tributes and forced labors were abolished. On the night of January 20, 1872, about 200 Filipino soldiers protested that night and killed several Spanish officers. Unfortunately for the rebels, suppression of the rebellion was the immediate response of the Spaniards. The three priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, or commonly known as Gomburza, was accused of the conspiracy of rebellion. On February 17, 1872, the priests were executed by garrote. Garrote is a process handheld tightening of chain or rope to strangle a person. Because of their death in 1872, years between 1872 and 1892 grew national consciousness among Filipinos who had settled in Europe.
The execution of Gomburza eventually accelerated the Filipino nationalism.
I am Beatrice Tibilyoga from Group 2, and our assigned report together with Miss Elman is all about the reform or the propaganda movement, the La Solidaridad and the La Liga Filipina. La Solidaridad. It was headed by the President Galicano Apacible, who at the same time the cousin of Jose Rizal. Among the other officers were Graciano Lopez Haina, the Vice President, Mariano Ponce, the Treasurer, and Jose Rizal, who was named as Honorary President in London at that time. He was also the one who took the prestige along with Del Pilar to unite the Filipinos in Spain and to coordinate their efforts, since Apacible could not hold the reformists together. Finally, in February 15, 1889, along with the Filipino propagandists, the La Solidaridad was formed. It was existed for more than 5 years, which was ended in November 15, 1895. The La Solidaridad also became the principal organ of the propaganda movement. The first editor of the La Solidaridad was Graciano Lopez Haina, but when the publication office moved from the Barcelona to Madrid, he was soon succeeded by Marcelo H. Del Pilar. The first issue of La Solidaridad came out, and its editorial expressed its aim. Our aspirations are modest. Our program, aside from being simple, is clear: to combat reaction, to stop all retrogressive steps, to extol and adopt liberal ideas, to defend progress, in a word, to be a propagandist, above all, of democratic ideas in order to make this supreme in all nations here and across the seas. The contributors of the La Solidaridad were mostly Filipinos, such as Marcelo H. del Pilar, aka Plaridel, Dr. Jose Rizal, aka Laon-Laan, Mariano Ponce, aka Naning, Kalipulo, and Tigbalang, Antonio Luna, aka Tagailog, Jose Maria Panganiban, aka Humapa, Dr. Pedro Paterno, Antonio Maria Regidor, Isabelo de los Reyes, Eduardo de Lete, and Jose Alejandrino. In the next slide, you can see here some faces of the contributors of the La Solidaridad. Some friends of the propaganda movement also contributed to La Solidaridad, namely Professor Blumentritt, an Austrian ethnologist, and Dr. Moraita, a Spanish historian, university professor, and a statesman. La Solidaridad was a political propaganda paper with a liberal reformist orientation. It served as the voice of what became known as a propaganda movement. It is to dedicate the task of fighting reaction in all its forms. It aims to gather libertarian ideas which are manifested daily in the field of politics, science, art, literature, commerce, agriculture, and industry. It also discusses problems relating to the general interest of the nation and seeks solutions to those problems in high-level and democratic manner. Later on, La Solidaridad stopped due to the lack of funds since propaganda movement failed to pursuit of reforms. November 15, 1895, in the last issue of La Solidaridad, Marcelo H. del Pilar wrote his farewell editorial saying, "We are persuaded that no sacrifices are too little to win the rights and the liberty of a nation that is oppressed by slavery."
Hi, my name is Mika Alman from Group 2 reporting for La Liga Filipina. La Liga Filipina, or the Philippine League, whose motto was Unus Instar Omnium, in English, one like all, in Tagalog, bawat isa'y katulad ng lahat, which involved the people directly in the reform movement through mutual aid, self-help, and setting up of cooperatives. In 1892, Jose Rizal returned to the Philippines and proposed the establishment of a civic organization called La Liga Filipina. On July 3, 1892, the following were elected as its officers: Ambrosio Salvador as the president, Agustin de la Rosa as the fiscal, Bonifacio Arevalo as the treasurer, and Judato Arellano as the secretary. Rizal itself functioned as its advisor. La Liga Filipina aimed to unite the whole country, protect and assist all members, fight violence and injustice, support education, study and implement reforms. La Liga Filipina had no intention of rising up in arms against the government, but the Spanish officials still felt threatened. On July 6, 1892, only 3 days after La Liga Filipina's establishment, Jose Rizal was secretly arrested. The next day, Governor General Eulogio de Pujol ordered Rizal's deportation to Dapitan, a small, secluded town in Zamboanga. How did this affect Rizal and the society? Filipinos achieved their own freedom and a sense of nationalism, respect, and honor. Rizal built the organization because he wanted to open the eyes of the Filipinos to the reality that they were being oppressed. Rizal also wrote his novels, Solimi Tangere and El Filibusterismo, during this particular time. Here are some of the form, duties, and rights of the member, general rule, and investment of funds. Form: to set these ends in operation, a popular council, a provincial council, and a supreme council shall be created. Some general rule: no one shall be admitted without previous and anonymous vote of the council of his village and without satisfying the test to which he must. Investment of fund: the member or his son, while not having means, shall show application, and great capacities shall be sustained. They also have some duties and rights for the chief, fiscal, secretary, treasurer, and for the members. La Liga Filipinas membership was active in the beginning, but afterward, they started to drift apart. The wealthy members wanted to proceed supporting the propaganda movement, but the others seemed to have lost all hope that reforms could still be granted. Andres Bonifacio was one of those who believed that the only way to achieve meaningful change was through a bloody revolution. The La Liga was thus dissolved before long, and its membership split into two groups: the Cuerpo de Compromisarios, which comprised the conservatives who aimed to continue supporting the La Solidaridad, and the Katipunan, which consisted the radicals led by Bonifacio.
Why did the propaganda movement fail? The propaganda movement did not succeed in its pursuit of reforms.
The colonial government did not agree to any of its demands. Spain itself was undergoing a lot of internal problems that time, which could explain why the mother country failed to heed the Filipinos' petition. The friars, on the other hand, were at the height of their power and displayed even more arrogance in flaunting their influence. They had neither the time nor the desire to listen to the voice of the people.
Since most of the reformists belonged to the upper middle class, they had to exercise caution in order to protect their wealth and other private interests. Next one is personal differences and petty quarrels are also hindrance to the movement's success. Last one, no other strong and charismatic leader emerged from the group aside from Jose Rizal.
Next, we'll have the first phase of the Philippine Revolution led by Andres Bonifacio, founder and leader of Katipunan Society, who instigated the revolt against the Spanish in 1896.
The Philippine Revolution started against the Spanish who had colonized the Philippines since 1565. The revolution against Spain had two phases: August 23, 1896, Declaration of Defiance against Spanish rule, and February 1899, the outbreak of the Filipino-American War. Here's to how it started. The Philippine Revolution was a combination of ideas from the Ilustrados, Filipino educated class during the Spanish colonial era, which led to start the nationalistic ventures of the people. This was inevitable as to how the Spanish domain abused the natives. However, because of the difficulty of communication within this time, the progress of this was slow. This is the beginning of the Philippine Revolution against the Spanish Empire led by a secret revolutionary society known as Katipunan led by Andres Bonifacio from 1896 to 1897. The Katipunan was established on July 7, 1892. Unfortunately, the outbreak of the revolution was premature due to its discovery by a Spanish friar on August 19, 1896. Bonifacio found out about this and decided to outbreak the revolutionary movement. On August 22, 1896, the Katipuneros had started traveling to Pugadlawin. Pugadlawin, specifically at the house of Melchora Aquino, was where they shouted and decided to tear their cedulas. This was how the cry of Pugadlawin was known in history. Cedula are identification receipts issued for payment of taxes. Tearing their cedulas was a symbol of their determination to take up arms against Spain. On August 25, the Spanish Civil Guard unit came and attacked the rebels. The rebels had greater numbers, but the Spanish were armed better. The forces disengaged after a brief skirmish and some casualties on both sides. On August 27 to 28, the Katipunan moved from Balara to Mount Balabac in Hagdang Bato, Mandaluyong. They held meetings there to finalize plans for the Manila attack the following day. Several attacks by the Katipuneros were successful, mainly because the Spanish guards were outnumbered, not until reinforcements came for the Spanish civil guards. In their Battle of San Juan del Monte was considered as the real battle of the Philippine Revolution. They were defeated because of the Spanish counterattacks and retreated back to Balara. On August 30, the mutiny had spread to 8 provinces. Governor General Blanco declared a state of war in these provinces and placed them under martial law. The provinces were Manila, Bulacan, Cavite, Pampanga, Tarlac, Laguna, Batangas, and Nueva Ecija. These provinces represented the 8 rays of the sun in the Filipino flag. Accounts claimed that rebels had few firearms and that most of their weapons were bolo and knives, which are clearly at a disadvantage against the guns and the supply of firearms of the Spanish guards. Historians claim that these are one of the reasons why the Katipuneros were defeated in the battle. Other causes include the leakage of Bonifacio's battle plans by the Spanish intelligence. Dr. Jose Rizal was also part of the propaganda movement as they exchanged letters with ilustrados residing in Europe and in the Philippines. Accounts claim that he doubted this insurrection planned by Bonifacio and disapproved of its violent procedure. He believed that violence is not the answer. He has no connection to the plans of Bonifacio, but he was accused because of inspiring the Filipinos to start nationalism. As we all know, Rizal published articles in La Solidaridad and advocated for equal treatment of the Filipinos. In 1887, he wrote Noli Me Tangere in Europe and described the dark treatments of the Spanish to the Filipinos. The novel was banned in the Philippines, but there were smuggled copies. He returned to Europe and continued to write El Filibusterismo. In 1892, Rizal returned to the Philippines, and although La Liga Filipina supported non-violence reforms, he was exiled in Dapitan. He learned medicine for 4 years. In 1896, he volunteered as doctor in Cuba. The revolt of Katipunan broke out. Although he rejected the invitation to join the Katipunan and had no connection with the revolt, he was arrested. On December 30, 1896, he was executed. This created more opposition to Spanish rule. The Katipunan in Cavite was divided into two: Magdiwang led by Alvarez and Magdalo led by Emilio Aguinaldo's cousin Baldomero Aguinaldo. On December 13, 1896, General Camilo de Polavieja took over. Little by little, de Polavieja was able to recapture about a third of Cavite. Magdiwang and Magdalo had arguments and disputes and refused to cooperate with each other. Eventually, both parties argued about Bonifacio as the leader. The Magdalo group wanted Aguinaldo to be the leader because of his successes in battles. On December 31, 1896, the Katipunan had an assembly in Imus and discussed about the organization. There was an internal rivalry in the group. The meeting ended without a resolution of the conflict. March 22, 1897, another assembly was held in Tejeros. Election for officers was needed for the revolutionary government. Bonifacio reluctantly agreed to chair the assembly. Bonifacio was merely elected to the minor post of Director of the Interior. Bonifacio lost to Aguinaldo's votes and moved his headquarters to Naik after the fall of Imus. Bonifacio made his own Naik military agreement opposing Aguinaldo. This movement rejected the First Tejeros Convention and reasserted Bonifacio as leader of the revolution. General Artemio Ricarte recounted that the black propaganda against Bonifacio in the form of anonymous letters circulated all over Cavite. The letters described Bonifacio as a Mason, an atheist, an uneducated man, and a mere employee of a German firm. Bonifacio moved from Naik to the barrio of Limbon in Indang, Cavite with his wife, 2 brothers, and a few loyal soldiers. Aguinaldo had learned of the Naik military agreement and immediately ordered Colonel Agapito Bonzon and a group of soldiers to arrest the Bonifacio brothers. On April 29 to May 4, Bonifacio was placed on trial together with Procopio by the Council of War. Despite the lack of evidence, the Bonifacio brothers were found guilty of treason and sedition and recommended to be executed. Aguinaldo ordered to deport them, but Generals Mariano Noriel and Pio del Pilar, both farmer supporters of Bonifacio, immediately asked General Aguinaldo to withdraw his order. The reason was that there would be no unity among the revolutionaries as long as Bonifacio was alive. They were supported by other leaders. Aguinaldo withdrew his order and reversed it to death sentence. A person named Severino de las Alas had made the false accusations against Bonifacio. On May 10, Major Lazaro Macapagal brought the Bonifacio brothers to Mount Tala near Maragondon. He was given a letter that if he failed to execute the brothers, there would be punishment for him. On April 23, 1897, Primo de Rivera and several soldiers from Spain took over Naik. Aguinaldo retreated to Batangas province. The Spaniards gained control over Cavite. Primo extended a decree granting pardon to Filipinos who will surrender. Some took this advantage and some proceeded to rebel. Aguinaldo and some of his men managed to escape and went to Biak-na-Bato, San Miguel de Mayumo in Bulacan. Aguinaldo was elected as president of Biak-na-Bato Republic and made these demands. 1. Expulsion of the friars and the return to the Filipinos of the lands they appropriated for themselves. 2. Representation in the Spanish Cortes, freedom of press and tolerance of all religious sectors, equal treatment and pay for peninsular and insular civil servants and abolition of the power of the government to banish citizens, and 4. Legal equality for all persons. Governor General Primo de Rivera realized that he might not be able to quell the rebellion and tried to end it by peaceful negotiations. He sent Pedro A. Paterno on August 9, 1897, a mestizo who created the Pact of Biak-na-Bato. December 14 and 15, 1897, the Peace Pact was signed. The pact provided for an end to the revolution by the laying down of arms by the revolutionary forces of Aguinaldo. They would then be granted amnesty and allowed to return to their homes. Aguinaldo and the other leaders would go on voluntary exile to Hong Kong. They would be given 800,000 pesos by the Spanish government in 3 installments. 1. 400,000 upon leaving the Philippines. 2. 200,000 when at least 700 arms have been surrendered. And 3. Balance upon declaration of a general amnesty. Spain also promised to pay 900,000 to Filipino civilians who suffered losses because of the revolution. On December 27, 1897, Aguinaldo with a check of 400,000 pesos left for Hong Kong with 25 revolutionary leaders. Continuation of hostilities. The truce fails. Some of the Filipino generals remained suspicious of the Spaniards, thus they declined to give up their arms. Some low-ranking Spanish authorities continued to arrest and imprison many Filipinos suspected of having been involved in the rebellion. For the people, the struggle continued. In the end, the Pact of Biak-na-Bato was just for the compromisers, Aguinaldo and his men. The people who were left behind still suffered in the hands of the Spaniards.
I am Nicole K. Cadiz, and I'm going to report about the Phase 2 of the Philippine Revolution. It is all about the Philippine-American War that took place after the Americans helped the Filipinos reclaim the country, the Philippines, to the Spanish rule.
The Philippine-American War is referred to as the second phase of the Philippine Revolution. This period began when Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines, but before that, on April 1898, Admiral George Dewey was sent to Manila to eradicate the Spanish Navy, and he defeated them in the Battle of Manila Bay. May 19, 1898, Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines from Hong Kong on board an American cutter from the fleet of Dewey. So why is Aguinaldo in Hong Kong? General Emilio Aguinaldo, the first president of the Philippines, in 1897 agreed to exile in Hong Kong in exchange for 400,000 pesos from the Spanish government. Rather than ease into an early retirement, the general organized his fellow expatriates into a revolutionary government in exile known as the Hong Kong Junta. This council smuggled food, medicine, and weapons to its besieged forces in the Philippines and established diplomatic relations with Australia, Japan, and the U.S. The initial enthusiasm for American support of the revolution against Spain turned increasingly sour. The Filipino revolutionaries became convinced that the United States was preparing to take over sovereignty over the Philippines from Spain. So June 12, 1898, Aguinaldo declared independence from Spain and raised the Philippine flag in Kawit, Cavite. He proceeded to organize his revolutionary government by decree of June 23, 1898, while pressing on the Spaniards in Manila to surrender to the Filipino revolutionaries. On June 20, Aguinaldo issued a decree organizing the judiciary on June 23. Again, upon Mabini's advice, major changes were promulgated and implemented, such as changes of government, change of the executive title, and the establishment of the 4 major departments. Filipino revolutionaries practically succeeded in ending Spanish rule in the Philippines. They had to contend with the American occupation forces who were determined to take over positions in Manila and elsewhere in the archipelago. During June and July 1898, American expeditionary forces arrived in Manila, and on August 13, 1898, Manila was surrendered to the American forces by the Spaniards. Moving on to the Spanish-American Secret Agreement. After a token, Battle Day after the Protocol of Peace was signed between Spain and the United States. The reason it was a secret because during the agreement, there was no Filipino representative involved. On December 10, 1898, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the Spanish-American War. The once proud Spanish Empire was virtually dissolved as the United States took over the Spain's overseas holdings. Before the Treaty of Paris was ratified by the U.S., on December 21, 1898, President William McKinley issued his Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation, which declared that U.S. would assume control and disposition of the government of the Philippines and instructed American military commanders to extend American sovereignty over the entire country. 2 days after the issue of proclamation, the outbreak of hostilities between the Filipino revolutionaries and American military forces started. On February 6, 1899, the Treaty of Paris was ratified. By the time the Filipinos and Americans faced each other in the Battle of February 4, 1899, the Filipino revolutionists had declared Philippine independence on June 12, 1898, had convened a revolutionary constitutional congress to draft a constitution for a Philippine Republic on September 15, 1898, and had inaugurated the first Philippine Republic at Malolos on January 23, 1899. But the republic did not survive. Less than 2 weeks after it was inaugurated, armed hostilities broke out between the Filipino revolutionaries and the American military. November 1899, in the face of American military successes, Aguinaldo ordered his troops to shift into guerrilla warfare. The word guerrilla is from the Spanish word guerra, which means war. Aguinaldo retreated from one provincial capital to another as the American military pursued him and engaged his revolutionary army in battle. Manila Ilustrados in the Malolos Republic eager for American protection in exchange for them immediate peace and order and internal autonomy which U.S. offered to them and abandoned the revolution. And on March 23, 1901, Aguinaldo was captured in the mountain regions of Palanan, Isabela. April 1, Aguinaldo took his oath of allegiance to the United States. It took until 1913 to establish peace and order in Mindanao and Sulu. Samar and Batangas battles proved that most tenacious in their resistance to American rule and also showed in dark colors the brutality of war breeds men regardless of race. The vigor of Filipino resistance to American pacification effort differed in different regions, reflective of Filipino commitment to the Malolos Republic and the Revolution. Some Filipino leaders and the populace accepted more readily than others in the inevitability of American rule and decided to cooperate to end the war. And on June 4, 1901, civil government was established to the pacified province. Pacified means to bring peace to a place or to end war in a place using military force. But there was still a resurgence of katipunan in some areas. Makari Sakay continued the resistance, establishing supreme government of the Tagalog archipelago, and his guerrilla force engaged in the American troops for 4 years. One of the tangible results of the Philippine Revolution is the alienation of the segment of Filipino Catholics who established a Filipino national church, the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, or the independent from the Church of Rome.